Thank you for having us here today with your meeting. I appreciate your time. We're with the Washington State Auditor's Office. Obviously, my name is Kelly Collins. I'm Director of Local Audit. And with me today is three ladies. I think you may have met them at the entrance. Yeah, Christina Baylor, she's your audit manager for the Everett team and oversees your district audit. Cardi Anderson, she's assistant audit manager and was highly involved in that. And then Claire Irwin was the audit lead. And so we're here to present the results for, in a sense, 3 audits that we did. We did the accountability audit for the fiscal period ending August 31st, 2014, and then also a financial statement audit and a federal compliance audit. The results were clean. We do have one audit issue in the accountability audit for a non-compliance issue that we'll go over with you. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Christina.
Okay. Alrighty, well, in front of you, everyone should have a packet of our draft exit documents that we'll walk you through. The first document is titled Exit Conference. This is really just an agenda of everything we're going to be discussing today. But before we go through the individual results of the audit, we did want to share a few highlights that we took away after working through it with your staff and conducting the district's audit. And the first one is we wanted to let you know that there were some delays in wrapping this one up. I'm sure you're not used to having an audit exit conference in July when we're typically out here earlier in the audit. We did encounter some interesting questions that took us a little bit longer to get through. Your staff were very helpful in understanding and accommodating to those I guess, delays in the audit. And we're happy that we're finally getting this one wrapped up for you, but we don't expect it to be a reoccurring thing next year. We've already committed to coming back in January. We gave your district first choice on when you would like your audit next year. The last one in gets the first choice for next year. So we do, just appreciate all of your staff's efforts and working with us. And on top of that, as we conducted our field work and we had questions arise or potential audit issues come up, your staff were very involved in the audit discussion process. They made sure that they were asking all the appropriate questions, really getting to the bottom of the issue. And that just really shows that you are committed to taking appropriate action to not only understanding the issue, but moving forward with corrective action. And that's something that, for an auditor's office, we really appreciate, the citizens appreciate, and that's something that we really noticed through working with your staff. And then the last item we wanted to point out for your district in particular is we took a look at the district's general disbursements during the audit period, and we noted no issues in our review of that area. And so that's typically an area that we'll find things. There's a lot of expenditures that roll through the district, and we didn't have any issues there. And so that's a really good thing to take with you. So good job on all those areas. What we're going to do is we're going to walk you through the draft audit reports. The first report that we're going to go through is called the Accountability Audit Report. It's the next document in your packet. I'm going to hand it over to Courtney to go through this report with you, but before we do, I just want to give you a reminder of what the accountability audit is for. The accountability audit takes a look at the district's compliance with laws, contracts, grant agreements, and your own internal policies and procedures. It's a risk-based audit, meaning we don't have time to look at everything that occurred during the audit during the district, during the year under audit, but we do a lot of planning procedures to determine the areas that we're going to look at, and we just take a look at all those things, and then also just general safeguarding of public resources. And so I'll turn it over to Courtney to share those results with you.
All right, so if you want to turn to the page, it's actually number 4. It says audit summary at the top. That's where we start. So at the top of the page, it talks about our results in brief. And the first thing that I just want to point out in there that it does mention the recommendation that Kelly addressed earlier. So we do have one item that I will go over shortly. Just as a reminder of our reporting levels of exception, we do have our highest level being a finding, our next level down is the management letter, and then an exit item is our lowest level. And findings are included in the report, so we do have one of those. However, we have no management letters that we will be discussing today. So that first item has to do with the Open Public Meetings Act and Code of Ethics violation, and we'll be discussing that shortly. At the bottom of the page, I do want to point out the other areas that we looked at. So we looked at financial condition, general disbursements, insurance and risk management, open public meetings, the use of restricted funds, the whistleblower compliance, bond compliance, and conflict of interest. And I have to say, of those, we had really the only issue, the major issue we had was just for the conflict of interest in the Open Public Meetings Act. So as a whole, very clean audit, and that there was a lot of areas that we looked at and we didn't have a lot of recommendations to come out of that. So we commend you for that. So if you want to turn to page 5, that is where the finding starts. So as I mentioned, this has to do with the Open Public Meetings Act and the Code of Ethics. There was a violation with those. There's basically 2 different areas that we saw. So just to give you a little bit of a background on what happened, this issue was actually brought to our attention by board members. So it had nothing to do with district staff or the process in place by district staff. It was something that the board members addressed and identified, and so because of that and because of the state laws that surround it, that's where this is coming from. So what happened was we were notified by 2 board members that there was a meeting, or a dinner, excuse me, that took place that was paid for by a vendor that was used for the new construction of the new high school. So because of the time we took a look at and we talked to the other board members to understand who was involved, and there were 3 board members that were at this dinner, and during that dinner the discussion of the high school came up, so there was business discussed. And so the 2 issues are because business was discussed, there were 3 board members, that creates a quorum, which according to the Open Public Meetings Act, it's required that if you have a quorum of board members present and business is discussed, then it needs to be done in an open meeting where minutes are taken, and that did not take place. So that's the first item. And the second one has to do with the Code of Ethics. Under that law, it basically states that you cannot receive gifts or meals or anything of that nature. And so by the board members having the meal paid for, that violates that Code of Ethics. So, and then on top of that, because of the meal when it took place, it happened in March, and then the first payment to the vendor actually happened in June. So the timing of when the meeting took place and when the payments were beginning to be made, it also gives the appearance that there could have been, the vendor could have been chosen based on that. So we do want to point out the fact that, so I guess I should backtrack. So the recommendations we really have is that the district obviously makes sure that they're in compliance with open public meetings, so they provide some training so that board members are aware of that, and then making sure that the Code of Ethics is not violated. But we do want to point out that because this was brought to our attention, the board was also in the process of adjusting their own policy, so to be in compliance with the Code of Ethics state law. So they have since revised it, so it is in agreement. And then in addition to that, 2 of the 3 board members also updated their personal financial affairs statement for the Public Disclosure Commission, which they're required to do that as well. So I do want to point out also, we have the district's response in here that basically addresses and goes over that. And then we also have our response in there. So are there any questions about the issue or?
So I attended that dinner. Could you talk to me a little bit more specifically about what your impression is of business discussed at that meeting?
So because we had 2 of the 3 board members agree that the new high school was discussed, the project was discussed, and so that creates.
Discussed at what level, at what? So here's my recollection of the discussion. We had a conversation about teal and my distaste for the color teal.
Okay.
And that color palettes that continue to be forwarded to me for carpeting and tile and those things repeatedly had teal on them. And we had a joking conversation about, to my recollection, about the fact that I was going to have to search every area in that school because I was pretty sure they were going to put teal in some custodial closet somewhere in that school just to make their point that teal needed to be a part of the colors of the school. So, I mean, seriously, that is my recollection of the depth of the conversation about the flooring in the school. Most of the conversation was of a very personal nature, sharing of Facebook photos, friending of one another on Facebook, etc. So I'm just curious what the threshold is of discussion of district business. There was no discussion of contracts, no discussion of pricing, no discussion of issuing of contracts, all of those things were happening separate and apart from me, separate and apart from the board, occurred basically through our capital projects office and were well in motion by the time all of that occurred. So I want to probe a little bit on this threshold of what constitutes discussion that's substantive to district business.
Right, and I don't know if the level of discussion, oh, go ahead, Ms. Columbia.
I just wanted to add, I agree with Larry because there wasn't district business and that I was not one of the board members that said that there was district business, so I'm a little bit confused on that. So I did disclose that we've had these meetings with the vendor because I was called by the auditor's office and I disclosed it at that time, but to my knowledge, there was not district business. My concern when I was called was that we were taking gifts from potential vendors, and that I became aware of when we had to report that on our, what's that form called? The F1 that year, and I saw that under there. And also another school board member from another district had mentioned it. So I'm with Larry on the open public meeting, because that's, to my recollection, what was discussed also, so that's kind of a surprise to me. And I know the 3 board members are there, so I'm not quite sure where this piece is coming from. Because I know I didn't discuss that with anybody, what was discussed. I just talked about the fact that we were in violation with the vendor.
And I was not at that particular dinner, but I guess my overall question is, are you applying the same standard to our district that you apply to every other district? Because if you go to the WASDA conferences, this is not an anomaly. This is not a unique situation that board members go out to dinner with vendors or whatever. So I just want to know that we're being treated the same. That's all.
And I'm Kimberly D'Angelo, by the way, just if you guys, we don't have a name tag today. So I just don't remember that I had a conversation saying that was the issue for us.
Okay. So I think what's important to know is this issue is driven by public perception. So there's definitely statutes and laws out there that say you may not receive gifts directly or indirectly that are associated with your business, and you may not violate the Open Public Meetings Act when there's a quorum of board members meeting, and there may have discussion of district business. The Attorney General's office actually produces a manual that's available on their website that's really useful in explaining items that you need to keep in mind. One of the things that you have to keep in mind is action is what determines if there's a quorum present. Well, if you look at the Attorney General's manual, action is defined as not just taking a decision, not making a decision, but actually discussing, talking about, doing anything related to your individual district. And so you might have just been having a friendly conversation about teal or something like that, but public perception could be that, well, that's related to your specific district. So it's just one of those things that you have to be really careful about. If you're attending a meal with a group of different districts and there's a vendor, you're not necessarily talking about your individual district, but if a public member is in attendance and they say, well, you brought up your specific district here, that's a violation, and that's where it comes into. It's a very gray area, but we had to base our audit conclusions on what we were told, and what we were told by 2 board members was that it did occur, and because there were 3 board members there, it appeared to be a violation of that.
What
that act.
occurred? What is the did? What occurred?
So there were 2 board members that said the district high school project was discussed, and on some level, the discussion of teal, even though it's a friendly discussion, I mean, that is specific, it's a friendly commentary about the specific carpeting going into your high school. So it's just a public perception issue. You have to be very careful because action is a lot wider definition than actually taking a decision.
Right, it is.
So at the end of the day, we don't feel that the district intended to violate or do any of this, and we do understand that conferences present opportunities for lots of districts to get together and hear presentations from vendors, but what we're trying to bring to the attention of the district is you just have to really be careful about public perception. These laws are out there, and then when you make these decisions on whether or not to go to a dinner or accept a gift or meet where there's a quorum present, you just really have to be aware of these rules that are out there and how would the public perceive that action.
So if that same action happened, they're sitting at the table, what could they have done that would mitigate a perception?
what could they have done once the action has
Well,
occurred?
if they're sitting, because I think you just said that it happens in the natural course of the
Right.
conference. What then could we have done to mitigate the perception that you're talking about? That, you know, it's kind of basis of perception, so what, I'm trying to get at what we could do.
Right, well, I think what we're trying to say is the district realized shortly after it occurred that, at least the meal part of it was, could be a potential violation, and that's how it came to our attention. You self-reported it to our office. There appears, and you're not the only district, there's lots of governments that tend to get confused on what action is and when there could be a potential violation there. And so what we're trying to do is make sure that there's an awareness for what action is. And so if you encounter another, this issue itself, if just the quorum in the very borderline discussion of the district is not what we would feel is a significant issue in itself. It's when it's coupled with the meals that it becomes more of a public interest issue. So it's just about taking that understanding and continuing to do training and continuing to make sure that you're not putting yourself in those situations where it could come up. Or once it does happen, removing yourself from the situation and acknowledging it and saying, you have to put a stop to it. So
Will you be talking to WASDA and clarifying how the lens that you'll be looking at this through? Because
We can share that. I mean, we do
Okay.
definitely a lot of outreach through the different business manager and director meetings, and so we can share that if you feel it's productive. Yeah.
I think I want to
Because we
add
don't run
that,
into this very often. But if you feel like it's an area that could have more messaging, we definitely can do that.
I just want to add that on the F1, it's
Mhm.
called, it does specifically ask about meals, which is what brought it to my attention.
Mhm.
So once I had to put a dollar figure in there and didn't want to answer no to it, said, have you ever taken any meals? My answer is yes, and then there's a supplemental form that asks about dollars. That's where it became, which I brought up at a board meeting, so it's sort of been made public.
Right.
That's where it became an issue where we all relooked at our policies at that. On that very day, we happened to be looking at the policy.
coincidentally, we wrote
Right.
We happened to be looking at that policy
Right.
and recognized, so that's where it became to my attention, because now I have to report to
So I
the.
just want to be clear that if the call was made to you, you went and you interviewed the different board members. If the board members then had said, no, business was not discussed, then we would not be seeing this here?
you would not be
Is that
seeing you would not be seeing the Open Public Meetings Act violation. You would be seeing the
Okay.
meal issue.
I don't remember.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I would just offer the two things. One is, I think I understand the public perception piece. I would think that, from my recollection, anybody from the public who observed that conversation, their perception they'd walk away with is that the superintendent severely dislikes teal, which would be an accurate perception. I'm not certain that they would walk away with a perception that the specific vendor to be utilized or the specific products to be purchased or the issuing of contracts or pricing or anything was compromised or agreed to or even discussed remotely, directly or indirectly as part of that meeting. So I'm struggling a little bit with, I hear you say, the perception and the potential violation. To me, a finding isn't a potential violation, a finding is an actual violation. And so I'm still a little bit hung up on what's the threshold that we're at here if we're at the point of a finding as opposed to a management letter. If there's question about what was really the substantive perceptual or actual discussion that constituted district business. Does that make sense?
Right. So, and I don't, the state laws don't give a detailed definition of that, right?
I understand that you have a fair amount of discretion in that, and that's where I'm probing a little bit, is what is it about that particular conversation, if that was the substance of the conversation, and I'm not privy to what your conversations were with the other two board members, that causes you to elevate it from the level of a management letter, and you kind of came close to the line, you should watch this because it's a potential perceptual issue, to actually tip it over to the other side of it's a finding.
Yeah, I think we're going off the remarks made by the board members that it was discussed. And I think it's a combination of the events, I mean, the bills that were paid for, just the combination of the issues. We weren't there either, and so, it seems like there's a little bit of a different version as we talk, but I think the concern is that it occurred. We appreciate and we tried to recognize in the draft the proactiveness of the district and the actions that they took, and if there's anything that you feel misportrayed, we're definitely wanting to correct that, so, or hear what you think of that, so.
I feel that I agree with what the level of the conversation was, and also that then this is part of the issue. I think that, I didn't know that he was a vendor of ours, so I think that's where we tried to correct that
Yeah.
I honestly didn't know he was putting the flooring in North Creek, so that's where I'm feeling a little bit caught off guard, but I again agree with Larry that was the level of the extent of the conversation.
The other question I had really was around the whole timing issue, and I noticed that, you note in your description of condition on page 5, although the process of selecting the vendor through the purchasing cooperative appears to have, because we are purchasing through KCDA, not directly through the Beresford company, appears to have been initiated before March 1, 2015. The district was unable to provide adequate supporting documentation to support its district process being independent of the dinner in question. And can you help illuminate a little bit what was it about what we could or couldn't provide that didn't demonstrate a sufficient disconnection between that dinner and that selection?
Yeah, I think it's one of those issues that you have to take all elements together, and that's where the appearance issue comes. The use of KCDA and the selection of just going to a vendor on that listing and getting quotes and deciding to go with that vendor is fine. That's a process that's in compliance with the legal requirements. It's complicated at the point that the dinner occurs, because indirectly or directly, the Code of Ethics states you may not receive a meal directly or indirectly with any potential vendor that you're going to expend district funds with. And so indirectly, you receive that benefit, and that happened to be the vendor that you came with. So now if other vendors on the KCBA listing were to see that you chose that vendor, it gives the appearance that they were not also given that same opportunity to provide quotes and compete. You don't need to get quotes from those other vendors, but the dinner is what complicates the whole public perception here, and that's where the crux of the issue is.
So our capital projects office wasn't able to sufficiently demonstrate that decisions they made on flooring selections and vendors were made months in advance and very far away from this particular dinner?
No, what we were provided, I think Courtney can speak to it a little bit better, was...
We did see some emails to show that yes, there was discussion with that, but there was no reach out to any other vendors, so, it was just that one vendor that was going through that process. And so, like Christina was saying, because the one vendor was selected and there was no additional, quotes or bids by any additional vendors, with the meal being involved with this one vendor is where it all comes together, that, there wasn't any concrete contract or anything with that vendor to say, this is the vendor we have selected on this day before this meeting took place. And so the first, we have the purchase order that took place in June of this year, which was after the meal. So it's just the combination of all of it together. There really was nothing to say, on this day we have selected this vendor, we have a contract with the vendor or an agreement. So we just have the purchase orders. But
just by way of background, we did obtain quotes from the other vendors because we've used those other vendors with poor results. Bad warranty, bad time, flaws in the previous contracts. So
Right.
Capital didn't feel the need to re-review their pricing when they had poor history with those particular vendors on
And
the
they
list.
choose on product.
They choose on product
For vendor.
and performance.
So the choice of the vendor is still, as we said, the choice of using the vendor through KCDA is not an issue. It's the fact that this meal took place and when it took place is what's complicating it. So
I don't feel comfortable going to dinner with a vendor. I mean, I come out of being in the business world at Costco, and we don't at all mix those two things. So that's just, I don't feel comfortable with it. And
Which
it
is
is what it is.
Which is what we clarified.
Right, no, I'm
Right,
saying, I
yeah,
know, that's, and we
yeah.
did clarify it, and we've had this discussion in a public meeting, and it's all out there.
Right.
So it's been recorded, and we've all had these
Which
discussions.
we do want to, you know, we're trying to give
Yeah.
credit to the fact that you did
Yeah.
everything that you could to make sure that it was public once it was identified.
So can I ask a question? So we select on product. So there, it's not a vendor selection per se, it's a product selection?
According to Karen,
Okay,
she had said that they first look at products that they need
right.
and what's going to fulfill their project requirements the most successfully.
So it's not
It's
a
not
vendor selection where you go out to different
heavy
vendors?
yeah.
You know, we might be talking about
And
a
they've had
different
interactions
process.
with other vendors in their processes and in their projects, so
Right,
they're aware of the other vendors that are through KCBA.
okay. So the process, it sounds to me different than, because I've worked in vendor management myself, where you have an RFP, you go out for bid with specific vendors. If you're going through a cooperative where you're looking for a product, it's a different process. And so, you know, the timing, I could see being different. And especially if we're choosing by product, that would explain why there might not be as much documentation about interaction with a specific vendor, because we're choosing on product.
Yeah, everything the district did was fine up until the point that the dinner was introduced. And so that's where, you know, once we had the dinner introduction, we looked back to see, is there anything we can support that all vendors had equal opportunity and that there were multiple carpet vendors, flooring vendors on the KCBA list, and we just couldn't see whether or not they were evaluated. And so when you
And the fact that we addressed it before the audit even brought it up
Right.
is not a factor in it either. I mean, we aren't responding to your finding, we corrected the problem first.
We still have to
so-
report the compliance issue
Yeah.
that occurred during the period, so.
Did the board members you spoke to indicate that they felt in any way the conversation provided preferential treatment to that vendor? That there was a connection between the dinner and the award of any contract or flooring product?
No. I personally didn't know he was a vendor, even at the time I talked to him, so that's all coming, even when we talked at the board meeting, I think I still wasn't getting that answer, so.
And I think we've been trying to, you
But he
know.
was a vendor at North Creek is what I'm saying.
Right. So, I mean, I don't think we're trying to emphasize a conflict of interest in the meeting as much as we are that there's an OPMA violation appears based on representations made to us by 2 board members, the quorum, that that project came up in some capacity. Yeah, I don't want to, we didn't get into how detailed, but it sounds like it did get discussed in some capacity. And then that the mill was paid for. The timing, I don't know, it really is an issue, but it just, when you bring it all together, it just doesn't look that good. And, we felt like we had to report something on it to address the compliance components that were at play. And so we don't really, we don't feel like the district had any intent here, but that's not the feeling that we've got from it, but it was a self-report. We're acknowledging it and trying to address it in the audit. And I wanted to give, because this is going to be public anyway, you've already addressed it in your meeting, and just wanted to recognize the district's actions that's been taken. And so it just hopefully kind of clears the air on the situation. So I know it's, I don't think we're trying
Isn't
to.
a management letter though in a report, included in a report?
No, it's not actually in the published report. So, I know you may feel like, you don't feel like this should be a finding, should be a management, but I guess one positive that I could possibly present to you is that it does kind of clear the air of, because we do have a lot of citizen interest, so.
Well, so I'll just offer, ask the question, is the citizen interest part of the determination of this being a finding as opposed to management letter?
No,
And I've sat through audits, when heading in my 13th year as a superintendent. I've been a part of findings before. They have been very clear. Suspension and debarment, you did not appropriately verify that this vendor was qualified for whatever business you were doing. They've been absolutely black and white. So to see this, which I suspect, in my mind, falls into somewhat of a gray area, as certainly intent, substance, content of the discussion. I have to ask the question of whether some of the citizen interest in this isn't influencing the determination of this being a finding as opposed to a management letter, and is that an appropriate factor to determine? I mean, the finding is, I don't want to have a finding.
Right, right.
Yeah.
And I wasn't trying to suggest that it was, I just was trying to say that since it has come up in your public meeting with what you were saying, that one of the benefits of us reporting this is also to address it for the district, so.
And I would say, we want clarity. We absolutely want clarity on what the expectations are and what we need to do, so that's good. I mean, I think we definitely, you're giving us that, and I think the only reason that I say, have you talked to WASDA, is that if this is the standard that you're going to apply everywhere, then I think it would be very kind of you to let people know.
We
in
can
the
add it
district
to the topics.
beforehand, so that a common practice doesn't take them by surprise when they are issued a finding.
What I'm hearing you say is we just don't go to dinner with vendors, and that to me is really black and white.
I think you need to be really aware if you
That
do step
don't.
into that situation, what's occurring, who you're meeting with, and how it's transpiring. I think there's increased risk to potentially do that. Not to say
I mean,
you
that
have
just
to.
seems easy to me.
But that's
That's
the conflict of interest part.
Right.
The OPMA part is that you're just together regardless, whether you're with a vendor or not with a vendor, right? Because the vendor part is the conflict of interest element. The quorum being together is different.
Which we're discussing on
Right.
Facebook right now. I mean, it's
That's,
the
I
same.
know, I'm hearing the same
Yeah.
exact
Yeah.
conversation, so.
It's that
That there
action
is-
that is interpreted much more broadly under the law
Right.
than
I know,
the
yeah.
normal
Yeah.
non.
You're kind of.
I know it's elected officials
will be.
You're kind of incorporating the two. It sounds like you're talking about lots of different elements coming together that made you rest on this decision. However, there is multiple, there are more than one issue within this context that you are presenting here, separate.
It gets to the heart of what is a discussion about district business. And, the layperson doesn't think teal is really district business versus, the layperson is gonna think district business is something differently. And so it's now the discussions on Facebook, outside of Facebook, wherever, that if there's 3 people, so much as saying the new high school's looking really
Thank
pretty.
you, thank you, that's,
Yeah,
that is exactly the.
It sounds like
Thank you.
Any sort of
they
comments,
just vibrate.
Any
even
comment.
tangentially.
Mhm.
Or just
Referring to
clarifying
district.
something that you're not even making an opinion on, or bringing up.
But I would say that it's not just the perception, because it's the people that's involved in the conversation. Because you guys asked the question, was their business talked about, and the answer was yes. So that tells me that it's not just a perception of the public, that it's the perception of the people involved in the conversation that needs to be clarified about what is business, what is the threshold of business. So,
I would concur with that. I mean, I think that's a fair
Uh-huh.
assessment. And what's their feeling, what's their takeaway from the conversation?
because it's just a question, was there business? Yes or
And
no?
I think
And
one
then
of
you
the
rest
3
on
is
that,
saying
and then we
no.
end up with a finding.
And-
Yeah, that was not my issue with it. My issue was I had to report this on an F1, like I've already stated, and that's where I now had the conflict that I had to report this.
Right, right.
So I didn't, until this conversation, to the best of my recollection, didn't think that we would conduct
Again,
business day. I don't know.
and not to be labored, and I know we have other things we need to work through here, I guess I would just say, having not had the benefit of talking to the other board members, if I were interviewed through the audit process about this issue, which I wasn't, and asked, was district business discussed? Was anything about the Northshore School District discussed? Yes. Teal, the presence of teal in our new high school. And And I guess I'm questioning legitimately whether that, unless there was something else that came from the other board members, whether that rises to the level of substantive district business that is of a public interest, that creates such a perceptual or actual issue to be at the level of a finding as opposed to being at the level of a management letter that says, you're getting close to the line there, you should even avoid that. I mean, I have no issue with the vendor relations aspect of it, the dinner. I think we can live and learn and be better from that, and we corrected that immediately. And I've reimbursed the Beresford company personally, and I continue to struggle with, having sat through that conversation, that level of discussion violating the public's interest in any meaningful way.
So I think that this is a really good point to bring up, because this is why last night I asked about, can we all talk to the lawyer about the different levels and situational things about Facebook and because these two things go hand in hand. What level can you mention something or say something? So I think this is a good conversation where we need to like flush this out more, because I have those same questions. What can I comment on in a public?
It sounds like
Well, that's what I'm saying,
Yeah,
yes.
it sounds like Teal
If
ended
Teal-
up in the findings.
That's
so I
making me
need
go,
nothing.
Yeah, I would
do not,
anything that says
even on my
North Shore,
personal page, I,
unless it's the North Shore soccer field, anything that says North Shore is starting to sound like stay away. If it's outside of the boardroom, basically.
So, I mean, I understand the laws and the
If there's
purposes for the
three of you.
laws, I struggle with seeing the harm, real or imagined, to the public interest as a result of that conversation. And I will leave it at that. I know we need to move on to some other items, and we'll move forward.
All right. So the only other portion that we'll go through just on page 10, it talks about the related reports. Sorry, I'm still on the accountability report, which Claire is going to go over shortly. And then on page 11, it talks about the information about the district, the brief summary. So if there's anything in there that you have questions about, you can let me know.
Which report are you?
I'm on the accountability report at the very end of it, the last page,
You're right
right in
there.
front of you. Yep, you're there. So if there's no other questions with this report, I'm going to turn it over to Claire, who's going to talk about the financial report.
Okay, if you guys could look at the next package, it's the rather thick one. It's the financial statement and federal single audit report. And just so you're aware, at the bottom, this was actually published on May 28th to meet the district single audit deadline of May 31st. So just so you're aware, it was already published.
Because we had to report to the state.
Correct.
May 31st is the deadline.
Or to the federal government for your single audits, yes. Okay, and if everybody can turn to page 4. This is just a brief summary, talking about the financial statements and the federal award. And then if you go to the next page, page 5, this just identifies the grants that we reviewed during our audit for this federal single audit. We did the Title I and the special ed. And then if you turn the page, oh, actually, I'm sorry, back to the summary page. This is just summary information. I'm actually going to go over the information in the following pages under the different reports. They'll identify where those items are. Okay, and if you turn to the next page, page 6, this is just the report on the preparation of internal controls over the financial statement preparation. And so it just goes into the internal controls over financial reporting information here. And if you go to the last paragraph, it's just talking about that we noted no weaknesses or any weaknesses regarding the internal controls over financial statement preparation. And then also I want to point out under compliance and other matters, the district, during our audit, we are required to look at certain provisions, grants, regulations to ensure that the district is in compliance with those items. And if you'll note the last sentence under compliance and other matters, that the results of our test disclose no instances of non-compliance or other matters that are required to be reported under government auditing standards. So, and then if you turn to the next page, sorry, it's a lot of turning, reading for reports. I feel like that's just my whole conversation. Turn to the next page. Okay, so page 9, this is the internal controls over the federal compliance audit. And on this page here is just one over the management responsibilities and the auditor's responsibilities. And if you turn the page to opinion on each major federal program, we're giving a clean opinion on that. And then if you look under report on internal controls over compliance, again, it's just discussing that there were no noted weaknesses on our review of those internal controls. And if you go to the next report, that's on page 12. This is actually the report on the financial statements. And it just, again, goes over the management responsibility and the auditor's responsibility. And if you go to page 13, this is where we give our opinion, and our opinion is unmodified.
Which is a clean opinion.
Which is a clean opinion, so that's great. And then we turn to the next page, under other matters, the supplementary and other information. During our audit, since the schedule of federal expenditures and the company, that and the schedule of long-term liabilities accompanied the financial statements, we reviewed those, and if you look at the last sentence in that paragraph, it's just saying that our opinion, those items are fairly stated in all material respects in relation to the financial statements taken as a whole. So, and then the next page of the financial section, this is just listing your financial statements. And they are included behind that, 20-some pages behind there. So, you want to look at that information. Watch your financial. Are there any questions on the financial report?
When you say material, that's your standard language, right?
It's driven by auditing standards, but material is large, significant items. Okay, well, if there's no questions regarding the reports, the last document included in your packet is just a listing of our exit items. Exit items are our lowest level of reporting. We're not going to go through them today. They're very common during the audit process, and they've already been discussed with management, but we did want to provide you with a listing of those items. Should you have any questions, feel free to contact us, and we'd be happy to discuss those with you. And then in conclusion, we just have a few items to wrap up our presentation today. In conjunction with our financial statement audit, auditing standards require that we communicate to you whether or not there were any material misstatements identified during the course of the audit. There were none, as you noted. We're also required to let you know if there were any small uncorrected misstatements that our audit identified that remain uncorrected at the end of the audit. We did have one very, very minor one. It's listed on that first agenda, which is the first item in your packet. Sorry, I'm back to that exit conference agenda. And so that's listed there. We agree with management. It's immaterial. It doesn't persuade anybody reading it to.
What essentially is it saying?
This is what I talked about last night.
Yeah.
The terminology has changed. Committed to
okay.
minimum fund balance is
Okay.
now assigned to minimum fund balance.
Okay.
We are, one of the difficulties with the timing of the audit versus OSPI, NSD Auditors, and the School District and County Advisory Committee is they haven't given the guidelines to change it.
Okay.
So 13-14 had no guidance. 14-15 we presume will have guidance before the year is closed.
Okay.
So we recognize that the
That's why we're
title,
changing the policy.
we are changing the title of the policy.
Yeah.
This is a very common item that many school districts received this year because the accounting manual wasn't updated yet. So.
Yeah, our big challenge has been that the accounting manual is well behind some rule changes. The auditors have to audit to a standard that the state hasn't caught up with, so we're caught in the crosshairs with, we have no guidance, and yet we're mildly penalized for not making the change when the change isn't available.
Play a more active role
Yep.
on the school accounting committee to get that up to date, because it's an unfair situation. The districts aren't given the guidance they needed, but we're in order to issue the opinion, and so this is tension going on. And so we've been trying to have a much more active role, and I think we have had a much more active role the last year, maybe two now, where we've actually been pushing, you've got to get this updated, because it's not useful if it's not, right? And so hopefully you're seeing that from what you're, in the interactions you're having. If you have feedback, it'd be good to hear, but.
Jolie lives on it,
Yeah.
like her predecessor, so.
Well, and I mean, you don't make changes overnight. right? It
Exactly,
takes
that's
time.
what I'm saying,
And then
there's
just when you get,
presence.
just when you get things updated, it's just like, okay, there's new things to make, and so it's just constant, so.
It's not unique to the accounting
Right.
aspect of the organization.
Right.
The state does like to build planes in the air while they're flying.
Right.
Deliver them to us.
And to OSPI's credit, they have been vetted in the last 5 years of state budget cuts, and they can hardly keep up with what the legislature comes up with and what everybody else comes up with, so.
Okay. Well, just a few last concluding remarks. We do expect to issue the district's accountability report in the next 1 to 2 weeks, so if there's any adjustments that you feel are necessary, it's still in draft form. We would be willing to hear those adjustments out and see what we need to do on our end to get that corrected. But we do typically publish on Mondays and Thursdays, so I would expect probably next Thursday, unless I hear otherwise from you that we need to delay that. So let me know. There is a link to our subscription service if you'd like to sign up. If you're not already signed up, you can get notifications when reports are released. You can also sign up to receive notifications of other districts' reports if you want to stay ahead of the game and see kind of what issues are out there. That's a good service to participate in. At our entrance conference, we did estimate the cost of the audit, and we're still approximating that same amount, so there's no significant variations there, which is really great. We will be submitting a customer service survey to Jolie. Feel free to send that on to anyone else that participated during the audit process. We value any feedback that we can receive on how we can better serve your district and your needs. So anything that you have to provide us, we appreciate. And then last but not least, your next scheduled audit, I mentioned is going to be in January. I gave Jolie and Lydia the chance, you let us know when you want us back, we'll come. And so January seems like the next time that we'll be back, and it's going to cover the same 3 areas, and we do include an estimate for that cost based on the current billing rate.
So the advantage is that there will be no summer brain drain. We'll be starting again. I just want to say on behalf of the board that we really appreciate your work, and it gives us nice confidence to know that you are regularly coming in and examining the books and examining our practices and making sure that we're in compliance, and we appreciate that very much. And I also want to express appreciation to staff, who obviously has been doing a lot of work to prepare for it and to be open to it and to really work to make it happen. So very much appreciate it.
Thank you.
And what is the auditor's office plans for a state auditor? Do you wait till November? We've got
Yeah, so
appointed.
Jan Judy is our appointed acting state auditor, and that's the situation until we are told otherwise. And so at this point, Troy Kelly is still officially the state auditor in his legal absence. That's been well publicized. And so that's how we're moving forward. And so we don't anticipate that he'll probably return based on the timing of the court case and all that. But we're probably looking to an election, and we'll see what that brings. So, we're just going ahead as normal. We do audits, and so it doesn't change how we operate. We've got pre-established management in place, and so now it's just Jan's signature on the report. So, if you have questions, if anything you've heard or anything, I'm more than happy to address those with you.
In your calendar.
Yep.